Incoming transmission.
The Klingon word of the day is "gu."
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
So, this is a huge victory for the good guys.
Scotty, beam me up.
Resistance is futile. Live long and prosper.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Greetings and welcome to the Computer Resume podcast, the show covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. I'm your host, writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. With appearances on The Tonight Show, Conan, Letterman, James Corden, Seth Meyers, Comedy Central, Last Comic Standing, and America's Got Talent, his first album, Vegan Mind Meld, was one of iTunes' top 10 comedy albums of the year, and his newest album, AKA, debuted at number 1. Among other things, he's still human. It's Myq Kaplan! Yay! Myq Kaplan! Hi,
Thanks for having me. Hello.
Dude,
much appreciated.
Thank you so much for carving out the time. I know you got to be busy. I mean, let's just dive right in. If you can't tell, Mike's a stand-up comedian from that intro. But how was your sort of schedule and day-to-day affected by COVID? Because I've heard from like the locals, and you kind of hear it from other celebrity comedians, for lack of a better term, celebrity comedians on their podcasts and whatnot, of like what they had to do. But like, how did it affect you?
Oh, sure. Well, I, in March of 2020, had a lot of things scheduled and then stopped having those things scheduled or postponed, and I generally, up until that point, and since in a more a cautious way, my life has been, for the last 20 or so years, traveling to do comedy about half the time, living in New York the other half the time, sometimes give or take a little bit. But obviously during from March 2020 until vaccination, I did not travel anywhere, saw my mom only like a handful of times in a park, and she lives just an hour away from me. Did a few comedy shows in parks, and did a bunch online, Zoom shows, Instagram live shows, all kinds. So that was something that was helpful because, like, for example, some of the colleges that I'd been booked to perform at, they just switched to have an online show instead, which isn't the same, but I think is better than no show. So I was fortunate to be able to, continue to do what I enjoy doing, but just from home for a while via, it felt maybe more like live podcasting or performance art than stand-up proper. But I was writing, I was performing, I was riffing, I was enjoying the best that I could. But I am also glad now that, things are, as much as possible, opening up safely, healthily. And I am, but yeah, for the time of the quarantine, it impacted things completely.
Yeah. I had some friends who got involved in the Zoom shows, the online shows, and I was just kind of like, that energy's not there. You're gonna have to structure your material differently. Like I come from it from the perspective of a writer. I actually started writing with comic books and sort of fell backwards into stand-up. But when stuff is so meticulously crafted, I feel like switching the venue sort of turns it on its head a little bit. Your stuff is pretty, I would say, very meticulously detailed, very precise. Did you find that you had to sort of shift gears or structure it differently? Because someone told me, it was like, oh, you just have to make it more conversational. And I was like, okay, that's still very different than, the standard thing. Did you struggle with that at all?
Thanks for asking. I mean, I don't think, first of all, nobody has to do anything. So you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it.
True.
I found it in a way freeing that like, for example, if I told a joke that, 99% of the time audiences would laugh at, but on a Zoom show where maybe people aren't even, unmuted, like you might get zero reaction from your objectively best joke, which meant like I wasn't going to be doing, my objectively best, polished, honed, curated jokes for a lot of Zoom shows. But what that
Right.
meant was I riffed a lot. I talked about, it made more sense to me to talk about what I was experiencing that moment, that day, because it was so far different, so far from what my previous, live performing and non-pandemic life was like. And so I found myself like creating a lot of new material, creating a lot of fun moments that might have only existed for that one audience in that one night, some more intimate, personal, just like, present experiences. And so the
Yeah.
way that I found it was that if I said something brand new, regardless of how people reacted, it could do just as well as my greatest joke. If nobody's laughing at anything, then anything that you do is the funniest thing that you can say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny because, in trying to, I like to look at people's material versus, the things they say in a public forum and try to, piece together, okay, where does, art and life kind of intersect and how does that end up, with this 45 minutes to an hour polished thing. And, it's so funny because there seems to be, even like in small venues, like mostly around here, Greenville has a very small scene. It's growing, but we're just getting going. But the venues are pretty small, and even in those small venues, I feel like there's a disconnect between the performer and the audience. And I feel like COVID was kind of that one chance of kind of like you either rose to the occasion and reached out to the audience of like, hey, I'm going through this with you, or completely stand off and just kind of like, to be continued. Like, was that the vibe?
I mean, that sounds very reasonable. I guess I only having my own experience, like I wanted to continue doing what I was doing. I wanted to perform and connect, and so I found that a Zoom audience, like for the most part, like they're there. I mean, anyone who's at a comedy show is hopefully there because they want to be.
Yeah.
But in part as well, there might have been, there might be some comedians who are like, I don't know, Zoom comedy is not for me. So I'm not going to do it. And there might be audiences that are like, oh yeah, that's not the same as live comedy either. So perhaps they both like self-selected to not be there. And then sometimes the Zoom audiences that I would have were like the most appreciative because they were the ones that, needed and wanted to receive just as much as the comedians that were performing wanted to deliver. Like one example is the Nowhere Comedy Club that sprung up. Steve Hofstetter, Ben Glebe, Chris Bowers, like they had a daily show for a while. Just like call it, I think, the Social Distancing Social Club. They like fostered a community.
Yeah.
There were people like, you could watch on YouTube for free. You could watch, all over the place, or you could, contribute in a larger way and then be like audibly laughing and on camera and in the community in like a more active way. And like some of those shows, like the first show I did of theirs was I did like just a 5-minute stand-up set, and the laughter was as close to a live show as I'd had in the pandemic, and it was like a few weeks or a few months in or whatever it is. And so since then, I mean, I've also, I did like a bunch of Instagram lives where I would just have conversations with my friend Liz Glazer, for example. And I just love talking to Liz.
Yeah.
And so it didn't even matter. Like we would look at the comments as they were rolling in and people would be hitting, like heart emojis and stuff. But mostly we were just having a good time talking to each other because we love each other. And we've also done versions of that, in front of live audiences variously, or in front of, assume an audible audience as opposed to a non-audible audience. So the odd in audience is the part that means audible. So if you're not audible, are you an audience? Though maybe it's that you're auditing it, but
True.
not paying full for the class or
Yeah.
the show. But yeah, so I felt that when I was doing like I actually started a new podcast during the pandemic that my girlfriend encouraged because she saw me do like a Nowhere Comedy Club show in 2020, like sort of maybe a couple months into the pandemic. And I riffed just like, not the whole time, but a lot of the hour was stuff that I'd never said before or said in that way. And she's like, you just have a podcast where you do that all the time. And so I kind of, there wasn't a lot of separation for me mentally as far as what's a comedy show, what's a live podcast, what's a this streaming, what's a that streaming. So I felt like, yeah, I mean, it's possible. I can understand how some people might have wanted things differently or, backed away from it. But I felt like I was busy and like there was a lot going on, at least, on my computer screen, on my phone. So I had to run across the apartment and be like, oh man, I got to do a show on the iPad now, quick. I gotta get off of this one 30 seconds earlier. But yeah, I mean, while we were in the midst of it, it was like, oh, is this it forever? Will there be when?
Yeah.
And so like for me, it was about making the best of the situation, which then turned out to be great. Like if somebody's like, hey, do you want to do 0 shows or like something that's more than a show, more than no show, but less than what you've been used to. I want to do something. And so that is why I did something.
Yeah. I think, a lot of the folks who couldn't either for one reason or another, couldn't seem to make the digital comedy scene work for them, I think ended up starting podcasts. I definitely fall into that category. And a few other folks over in England, the Red Shirts podcast. It's 3 British comedians just talking about Star Trek, and they've had me on a couple times, and they're just a really fun bunch. And I mean, there's a lot of people all over the world who are doing a similar thing. I think this is the new wave of podcasts. Definitely started up during the pandemic. But one of the things, you mentioned, we talked a little bit about structuring material and all that stuff. And one of the things that drew me to reach out to you was you have some very nerdy content in your material. I think I heard I have Sirius XM in my car, and I was listening to Comedy Central, and I think it had the chop bit that included the Magneto jokes.
Oh, sure.
And I was like, is one of us? I was like, I'm very well versed in the comic books. So it prompted me to reach out to you and ask, hey, I've got this Star Trek podcast. Would you be down to come on? And of course, you graciously said yes, but then you followed up with, I'm not a big Star Trek fan. So let me ask you, what came first, your nerddom or comedy?
Thanks for asking. Let me think about that for a second. Also, it's true that my relationship to Star Trek is I simply just I haven't engaged with it that much. Like, I feel like saying I'm not a big fan, while that might be objectively technically true, I feel like has the connotation of I don't like it. Like, oh, not a fan.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
And so I don't know what language I did use specifically, but I imagine it was, the truth is that I've seen some of the movies, I've seen some of the episodes, but my guess is that I've seen, less than 50 hours of Star Trek content entirely.
Okay.
And it might even be, like I've seen like the newest, like the J.J. Abrams movies and a few of the older movies, not all of them.
Right.
And then, an episode here or there. And whenever I watch them, I enjoy them. Like I don't think I've ever watched a Star Trek anything and thought, this is bad or I don't understand it. Like, I had a good time watching the episode that we're going to be talking about today. Like, there's lots to like. I get it. And it's just, there's in each human incarnation, a limited amount of time. And I just never had an experience with Star Trek. I never watched one Star Trek thing that made me think I must watch every Star Trek thing.
Right.
And part of it might be that I've been at times in my life a bit of a completist, and knowing that there is so much Star Trek. Like, another example, I have a lot of friends in my life who love Doctor Who. And at one point, I think I might have been dating somebody who was into it, or just I had a friend who was like, here's what you want to do. You want to watch this one episode. And it was an episode about these, like, I don't know, statues that were angels that if you weren't looking at them, they'd move towards you.
Right. The weeping angels. Yeah.
And it was cool. It was really beautiful. And then they were like, and also, hey, watch this one about Vincent van Gogh. And I watched it, and it was beautiful. Yeah. And then, but the idea I was like, there's so much of it. There's like years and years, decades worth of content. And I'm like, it's definitely, and as a person, like, I'm the kind of person who would want to watch all of it, but I'm like, well, the next best thing is watching none of it. So that's kind of where I'm at with Star Trek as well. Like, nobody's ever been like, hey, here, I don't know, like, this is, I don't know if you're the person to ask, because you're the one who's like, let's go episode by episode through all of it. But to create, a list of, like, if you're not going to watch all of it, like, what's the most, I'm curious, like, what content, like, what's the quantity of actual, like, how many dozens, hundreds of hours are there? And, like, if you had to, let's say there was 1,000 hours of Star Trek.
Sure.
I'm like, okay, what's the most important 50? Give me.
Yeah. I think that's part of the fun thing with watching some of these Star Trek podcasts and their presence on social media is a lot of that is kind of like, hey, here's our top 50, here's the top 50 holodeck episodes, or here's the top 50 aliens, or, or top 50, that's crazy. Top 10, whatever. And that's kind of something that I've been wanting to do once we get a little bit deeper in the franchise, is to examine this and say, okay, it's been running since 66. Can we streamline this a bit to the bullet points? What do I need to watch? What are the bangers, And I always feel like, and I feel like every fandom kind of has this thing where you try to do a best of list, but I feel like the best of list is actually easier to put together backwards, because you look at, like, those most important things that endured, and then you can kind of work back from there. Okay, well, this person was in it, so we need their stuff, and they talked about this thing, so we need those. And if it doesn't fall into those categories, it's kind of like, okay, does it really need to be here at all? And you can kind of weed things out from there.
So this I think will be relevant to both what you're saying and the question that you asked that I'm, sort of taking us into the weeds on. But, like, I am a big, like, I'm a comic book fan. And obviously today with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like, there can be many people, there's a lot, it's more accessible, it's more mainstream.
Right.
Like, and I'm not, like, the nerdiest nerd that ever nerded, but, like, I've been reading, I, like, picked up my first comic book. I used to read Archie comics, tons of Archie comics, Mad magazines and such. And then when I was, I don't know, like 10 or something, my uncle brought me to a comic book store, and I saw the first Secret Wars, from like 1983, and it had all the characters on the cover. And I'm like, I like all the characters, I like Hulk and Spider-Man and X-Men, and these other ones are fine too. And so I just started buying comics because they looked cool, and then they seemed cool, and then I got into, like, eventually reading for who was writing them more than even, like, what they were about. Like, I always loved Spider-Man, but I got the original, like, Marvel Marvel Masterworks, like first 10, and read those. And like, of course, they're like iconic and valuable, but also in a different context than like they're Spider-Man comics that speak to me more that were written recently than ones that were written in the 60s. Like listening to Lenny Bruce now, you might be like, wow, that he was important, probably. It seems like everyone liked him for a reason that makes sense. Whereas
that's
like
such a great comparison. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Thank you. And like compared to like Carlin, you'd be like, oh, like you can listen and engage immediately. You don't have to be like, now what was funny about this? What do I have to know? So society was bad, you say? Okay, well now I get it. And so here's the thing. I love Spider-Man, and I haven't read every Spider-Man comic, every of the hundreds and hundreds that exist. And I don't feel pressured to. Maybe if I lived infinitely, then maybe I would. But
yeah.
Maybe in another life at some point. But like recently, like I love specific runs. Like I love Dan Slott's writing. So I loved when Dan Slott was writing that. And then I never really read Silver Surfer until Dan Slott started writing it. I'm like, I'm going to read all of his Silver Surfer. I'm going to read all of his Fantastic Four. But I feel like, so to get to the question of like, I mean, I was certainly into comic books and sci-fi and other, whatever might fall. The things that I'm into that fall under the nerd or dork umbrella, like those certainly preceded my doing of comedy or even my being aware of comedy, other than, I watched SNL when I was a kid and I saw a few comedy specials of like, Paul Reiser, Seinfeld, like Norm Macdonald.
Yeah.
And so, but I didn't become like, if I had known that a comedy nerd was a thing that could become eventually, like then maybe I would have been. But I grew up pre-internet, and so I would just find eventually once like in the 90s when I got into like Mitch Hedberg, and then I was like, oh, there's comedy CDs are great, and I go to used record stores, and so that did become like something that I got into. I mean, I guess it's funny. There's a Lenny Bruce joke that I like a lot, actually, that I feel like is relevant to my experience here, which is he said, "I'm not a comedian, I'm Lenny Bruce." And so like, I'm not a nerd. I'm Myq Kaplan. And you're like, well, isn't Myq Kaplan like a subset of nerd? I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. So do you not understand the point of what I'm saying? I'm making a Lenny Bruce reference. Okay, so the point is, and here's an even more, when Lenny Bruce got really angry, he turned big and green. That was Lenny Bruce Banner. So.
Nice. Nicely done.
And so, yeah, so I remember, here's another sort of story that'll speak a little bit to the point that we're sort of circling around. I have glasses. I've had glasses for a long time. Like in high school, I got glasses when I was 9, and then in high school, like a slightly older girl than me was like, hey, take off those glasses. Let me see what you look like. And I took them off, and she's like, you should get contacts. And so then I got contacts. And then I wore contacts, for a decade until at some point when I was an adult, I was like, I feel like the glasses, like I felt at the time when I switched that it came out of insecurity. It came out of like, oh, I want to make people like me. I want to be attractive to people. This person found me attractive this way. Eventually, I came to understand, that like glasses versus contacts were not like the main deciding factor of whether a person would be interested in spending time with me, potentially romantically. And I was like, it's actually much easier to just wear glasses. And I like how there's cool glasses. My girlfriend helped me pick out these glasses. Like they're fun. And yeah, you got some nice glasses. Yeah. And but there was a time when I moved to New York in like 2008 when I was around, must have been around 30 years old. And I remember a friend of mine, a comedian at the time in 2008 was like, hey, do you think like you're kind of rocking that like, nerd look, right? That seems like it's pretty in right now, kind of trendy. So like, do you think I should get some glasses? And I'm like, these are for seeing, you know what I mean? Like
need these.
I wear, like, you can do it if you want, but like, perhaps there was like some good luck timing that like by the time I started telling jokes, about comic book characters, more and more people were becoming aware of them because of like the rising tide of mainstream comic book character understanding. But I was like, I'm just doing what I like and what I need to. Like, I'm buying this comic because it looks cool. I'm watching these movies. I'm getting these recommendations, listening to these podcasts, these TV shows, like because they're what I'm into. And if somebody else from out the outside is like nerd, then I'm like, okay, like that's like doesn't, maybe it would have like hurt my feelings when I was a kid and I was, sadder and more sensitive to such a thing. But there's many more damaging things that you can do or say to me than that 4-letter word. So
right.
So at this point, in fact, I feel like I was just doing another podcast earlier today, and this analogy arose for a different reason. But Voltron, the original Voltron that I saw was the 5 lions, and there's robot lions, and then they team up to become a big main robot where each of the lions is one of their limbs or the torso and the head.
Yeah.
And the idea is like, okay, so that's Voltron. It's like, oh, are the 5 lions by themselves Voltron, or it's only Voltron when it's, and it kind of like, look, they're lions, they join up, and that's the thing that happens. I'm like, okay, wait, okay, so when was your nerdery born? Did nerd happen before this or that? I'm like, hey man, I'm on your podcast making jokes about Voltron, so I think we can just move forward.
Yeah. It's so fun because again, I always love to see, how things were shaped, and somebody very kindly called my style of comedy highbrow silly. I was like, thank you. And I think that comes from, I think there was a little bit of the same as you. I grew up youngest of 3 boys. My next oldest brother was 13 years older than me.
Wow.
So yeah. And my oldest brother's 20 years older than me. So by the time the middle brother was in the demographic for Saturday Night Live, David Letterman, Kids in the Hall, things like that, his 4-year-old little brother was sitting right next to him, absorbing all of it. And, so it was that at night after, I would sneak into his room and watch TV with him. But during the day, it was Looney Tunes from the 40s, and one lump or two, oh, 2, bam, bam, that sort of thing.
That's
and
fun.
That kind of ended up shaping me. And, once I found comic books, because I hated reading in school as a kid. It was being forced to read things you weren't into, about people you were not interested in. It wasn't until much later when they let us pick books and biographies and autobiographies to do a report on them, just pick somebody. I'm like, okay. And, found some, interesting Harry Houdini. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one. But yeah, I really enjoyed Dan Slott. His Spider-Man was so great. I was a big fan of J. Michael Straczynski.
Oh, sure.
Loved that run. Of course, that happened, middle of his run was 9/11. So like that kind of changed all of that stuff. And
I loved Eric Larson. Like, still to this day, The Savage Dragon is the longest running comic that I've read, from beginning. And
that's cool.
Yeah, I think he was the first, maybe he was the artist. Yeah, it was him and David Michelinie, his run on Amazing Spider-Man. And then when he took over for the previous Todd McFarlane, just adjectiveless Spider-Man.
Right.
Which I guess they didn't call it the adjectiveless Spider-Man. And also, I just wanted to, real quick on a joke topic, I grew up the oldest of 1 boy. So also the youngest, and as it would be, and no girls, the oldest of all one of me.
Yep.
But so I loved Eric Larson. He also, it's just so clearly like silly and fun loving, but also taking it very seriously. Like it's really nice to see people, which is kind of like, in some ways, comedy itself. Anybody who takes comedy seriously as a profession, like, is doing something that could be silly in a fun way, in a serious way. Somebody is taking silliness seriously. Though also, I think some, like Lenny Bruce, actually, I'm not familiar enough to be like, he wasn't silly at all. He probably was. Like, Carlin is a great example of somebody who's like, from one perspective, talking about like the woes of the world, the most serious thing in humorous way, and then also, hey, word stuff and farts,
Well, it was so funny to, I always point people to his album AM/FM. I was just like, that's kind of all you need to know about Carlin in one album. It's just this side is like the serious stuff and this side's the silly stuff, and but it's all from this one dude. And I had a Bill Cosby album growing up that I played because I love storytelling. I love comics, I love movies, and the art of storytelling is it just engages my brain. Like a lot of people like to listen to certain music on their drive, like especially on their morning commute. I'll actually listen to stand up because I feel like that actually engages my brain more, because I'm listening to what's being said, but I'm also, with all the stereotypical comedy rules, things work better in threes, hit that hard K sound, all that stuff. But I'm, analyzing, it's like, okay, they didn't do that there. I wonder why. If had they done it, would it have hit harder, or would it have not worked? Would it have not fit the personality of the person? And that just gets my brain firing on my way to work. So by the time I get to work, I'm raring to go. But yeah. And you mentioned people using the term nerd in a derogatory sense. I always feel kind of like it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And, so much of that is comedy, but like also when I talking with someone like yourself, when I'm just like, oh, nerd, one of us. Yeah, there's that vibe. But then there's other people in my life who are just like, oh yeah, so-and-so is kind of a nerd. I'm like, hey, dial it back.
Here's a quick story. Do you know the comedian Nick Vatterott?
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Well, highly recommended. He has a new special called Disingenuous that I think you'll like a lot. And his first album is also a masterpiece called For Amusement Only. And he's got a few late night sets that are really like innovative. And he's often just doing stand-up, but he's often doing more than just stand-up as well. And so he's a friend, and I love him a lot. And one time I was out to lunch with a different friend, a woman who is not a comedian. And in the course of the conversation, it occurred to me, I was like, oh, do you not know? You should know Nick Vatterott. I think you would really like Nick Vatterott. And I said, he's like a super funny weirdo. And then my friend, her face got kind of serious, and she like reached out and like put her hand on my arm, and she was like, Mike, I don't know how to tell you this. I'm like, oh, I know I'm a weirdo. And she's like, oh, thank God. Phew. I mean, I thought you were just saying that wow, can you believe that guy over there is weird? Meanwhile, you're pointing with like a giant clown finger, and you're made of rainbows. And I'm like, oh, I know all that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We can smell our own.
So yeah, that is. I'm happy to like I guess this old joke of like you ask a fish like, hey, somebody's like, hey, how's the water? And the fish is like, what's water? So I feel like there are certain aspects of a person's identity that like come from interaction with the external world. Maybe, if not all, like so much, like, whether could be things as substantial as like, gender or sexuality or what have you in that department. But also like in this respect, like I have a new joke that's essentially about like, for example,
I was going to say, you don't have to burn it here if you don't.
Oh, no. I'm just going to tell you about the joke.
Okay.
And so there's a part of it that might be like I was thinking, I've been studying Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist. I haven't taken any vows. Like I have a friend who is I guess, an avowed Buddhist. He has taken layperson vows. He's not a monk, but he's like, I am a practicing Buddhist. And I am not one, but though I love it a lot. And so people often ask me, like, are you Buddhist? Based on my talking about it as much as I do, because I do care about it a lot. And so I'll say, I guess, compared to like, I'm probably more, if it's a spectrum and you can be more or less Buddhist, then I'm probably, in some ways, because of my engagement with it, I'm more Buddhist than almost everyone in the world, who hasn't engaged with it.
Sure.
But I'm less Buddhist than all the Buddhists. So
Okay. Yeah. All right. That makes sense.
and so similarly, like to most people, like to anyone who's not listening to your podcast, to the jocks of the world. And obviously, these days, it's not that there's just a binary of like you can only like sports or comic books. You can only like Star Trek or dumb thing, whatever.
Right.
But for whoever the people are that would use the word nerd pejoratively, derisively, as a weapon, like, yeah, to them, I'm certainly more of a nerd than them in this way. But there's also probably, like, I imagine you might have some fans that when they hear like this guy's not a Star Trek fan, then this guy's not a nerd at all, I guess. This guy's a massive Adonis. This guy's just like a
You
beautiful...
hear that, boys?
Yeah.
Get him!
Get him a full box set of all the Star Trek stuff. Quick, stat.
I mean, I have too. I might as well.
So yeah, so it's the reason I brought up the fish not knowing what water is. Like, I get it. I get the assessment, but like there are aspects of my identity that I think about more than others. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I read what I like to read, and some of it, and a lot of it's comic books from the library these days,
Yeah. A lot of, it seems like the more hardcore nerds, which is funny to me because they tend to be the ones who consume the most of it. I feel like there's a big, like, standoff of like, no, the library, I'm going to the comic book shop, I'm going to own them. Like, okay, what else are you going to own in your life? Like a car, a house? You might want to consider the library or digital. Those are very cheap and fit on a tablet.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned things impacting someone's identity and personality. That's kind of what we see happen to Captain Archer in this episode. He's on a very dedicated track with the Xindi War, especially after they attack Earth, which is, we're slowly beginning to understand that the end of season 2 into this season 3 of Star Trek Enterprise was definitely the writers and production commenting on 9/11, because Enterprise started like less than 2 weeks after 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they finally sort of, once the dust started to settle a little bit, they're like, okay, Star Trek has always been a commentary. Let's start commenting. And this is where we see this begin at the very end of season 2, the Xindi attack. They cut a new Grand Canyon in Florida and killed millions and millions of people. But they're Floridians, so we're not too worried about it. But after that, Archer goes from explorer to man seeking vengeance, and him and the things that he goes through. It's so funny to see. I shouldn't say funny, but like, it's interesting to watch him be impacted with this element from the Hatchery ship and how that affects him almost immediately, and with some severity, to a point where he's got a mutiny on his hands.
I mean, yeah, I think you're making great points. And also, it's such an interesting episode. I mean, I'm sure you're going to say more about it, but the idea that, like, a lot of the things that he was saying when he was impacted were also reasonable things. Like, let's help save the lives of innocent babies, for example, even if they're the babies of your enemy, like, even if they're from Florida, right? Like, when they're babies, they deserve a chance, to leave Florida or what have you. But like, sincerely, like, I also understood when he was sprayed with the stuff that, like, it wasn't a big surprise when the conclusion worked out the way that it did. I mean, maybe at one point, like, I feel like, I don't know if this is an homage to another, like, specific, sci-fi, like, historical, like a Twilight Zone or a different movie, because it really, other than the fact that these are these specific characters in this specific context, like, it seemed like a story that I have seen before in various forms, and I enjoyed it. But and the part that was really, like, cool was I was like, oh, like I feel like they did a good job of finding a thing to be debated where it's like everybody has a good point. Almost everybody is right. Like what is, right now, like I have some money in the bank that I'm grateful that I have, that like throughout the pandemic, I was glad that I had some savings, like just because I wasn't making the money that I normally was.
Of course.
And like it's reasonable, I think most people in a capitalistic society be like, yeah, it's good to have some savings if you can have it. In the meantime, I also like try to have dollars on me as much as possible. And if anybody I'm walking past asks me for $1, like I can afford many dollars, like, so I always am glad to have them because, and the money, like anyone who has money in the bank, like for your future self, like that could help current people. And like, I also, I do my best to like contribute to causes and communities that I think need it. But then the question often becomes like, I read Peter Singer, the ethical philosopher, like when I was in my early 20s, and he's like at least theoretically a hardcore utilitarian. And even more than theoretically, he's like, I mean, ethical philosophy isn't just to be like theorized about. Like ethical philosophy is about how to live. So it's like, oh, I guess it would be really good to live like this. Anyway, now to do a different thing.
Right.
Like we got our theories, but now back to oppression. Now back to colonizing. Now back to continuing to, eat meat at what have you. So like he was one of my first like forays into like putting a voice to what would eventually become my veganism. But so that back to the question of like philanthropy and charity and money, I think the hardest version of I read a book of his called The Life You Can Save. And it starts with like a philosophical thought experiment. If you were walking by a pond and you saw a child drowning and you're the only one around, you're almost everyone. You're like, you gonna go in that pond and save that child? Yes. And what if it ruins your shoes and your suit or your whatever you're wearing? Like, I mean, child's life is worth more than $100, a couple $100, whatever it is. How much is a child's life worth? But then if you have a couple $100 to spare, there's children who are at least metaphorically, if not literally, drowning and dying all over the world. And so the question of so the hardline version of utilitarianism that he offers is until everyone has the bare minimum to survive, give away everything you have until you get down to that bare minimum. He acknowledges that's not a great sales pitch, that it's not going to have the desired outcome. Right. So he at the end of this book, he offers sort of like a kind of a hierarchy, like the way that our tax structure exists now, that if you make a certain amount, then you pay a little more. If you don't make that much, then you pay less. If you make below a certain amount, you don't pay at all. And so similarly, I think if I remember correctly at the time, then the book came out some years ago, it was like, if you make $10 million a year or more, then you could stand to give away, 30% of your wealth, and you'll live fine on $7 million a year.
Yeah.
If you're making $1 million a year, give 10% away. You'll be fine with $900,000. Right. If you're making, $100,000, you could make it on 95. And like below a certain amount, they're like, just you can hold on to that because you're gonna need it. Yeah. And he was like, mathematically, if people did this, then so many of the challenges that the world faces in, shortages of because it's not that there's a shortage of food in the world. It's just that it's not in the places where the people who are hungry need it, or clean water, or, disease treatment, or what have you. Yeah. And so the question is like, oh, where does the line get drawn, societally as well as personally? Like in the episode where one character is like, we need to do everything that we can to save these innocent lives, even though we want to go help save other innocent lives later with the fuel that they need some of. And I mean, everyone's right. Like, it's good. Save these lives if you can. And also, and it's kind of nice that in this particular world, they're like, okay, we made it. We're all in our right minds again. We're heading off. We've got our fuel, and probably those babies' family, they'll show up and they'll be fine. And the ones that are alive, they'll stay alive. So good news. We thought that we had to choose, but we didn't. But,
Yeah.
for a while, like before the resolution, I mean, they were great. Like, and this is my first episode of Enterprise that I'd ever watched. Love a Scott Bakula, really enjoy.
Right.
Big Quantum Leap fan, and
Yes.
Men of a Certain Age, and all the other whatevers.
Oh, yeah.
Everything. I've seen everything he's done except for this. And big Scott Bakula fan except for Enterprise. Loved watching him. But this is I didn't know like the greater context of the larger war story, like the previous season leading into. I watched the previously on, to make sure I understood enough and who the people were. But yeah, I was like, I mean, to me, it could go almost any, like they could just stay there and they could have died. I assume they weren't probably going to die, but like if it were realistic, like that's a real like ethical quandary.
Yeah. And I think, as much grief as I've given the writers over the duration of this series so far, and I've even gone as far as to say, they're shooting on the Paramount lot. Could they not step over to the Comedy Store and just say, hey, we need some comedians for the writers' room? But yeah, they really hit some of these things, these topics. And again, this show is 20 years old. So the episodes watch differently today than they did early 2000s. And I didn't think that would be such a big thing until I started deep diving on each one of these and was like, oh, like some of the treatment of women is this, this is problematic. This is, we've got some racist stuff in here too. Like, oh geez, this is very cringy. But yeah, it's been a long road getting from there to here. But yeah, so without further ado, before we get too much deeper, let's get to this week's recap.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
UPN Wednesday on an all-new Star Trek Enterprise.
I'm sorry, Captain, I can't obey that order.
You're relieved as first officer.
What has gone wrong to turn the crew and the captain against each other?
I need officers who respect the chain of command and can follow orders.
If he finds out what we're doing, we'll both end up in the brig.
Star Trek Enterprise.
Enterprise investigates a lifeless insectoid vessel that crashed on a barren planet, hoping to find helpful info in its computers. Archer leads an away team to explore the wreckage and discovers an insectoid hatchery.
He said it!
With several dozen surviving eggs, but a failing biosupport system. He is sprayed in the face by one of the eggs. Doc Phlox concludes it was a defense mechanism and treats him with an analgesic.
Anal what?
Few dead insectoids and one of their shuttles are taken aboard Enterprise for analysis, and computer logs reveal the survivors cut off their own life support to save the ship's hatchery.
There it is!
Despite objections, Archer keeps Enterprise at the planet and orders Trip to repair the biosupport for the hatchery.
He said it!
Incompatibilities with Starfleet portable power generators cause an overload, prematurely hatching one of the eggs, but Phlox can't save it. Increasingly obsessive, Archer soon orders the transfer of 1/3 of Enterprise's antimatter supply to the Xindi ship so that full power can be restored. With the success of the mission in mind, T'Pol refuses to carry out his order, so Archer relieves her of duty and has her confined to quarters. Soon after, Reed, in control of the bridge, destroys an escaping Xindi ship. Archer relieves him as well, saying that the alien crew could have helped to save the eggs. Archer promotes Mako's Major Hayes to first officer. Hayes questions nothing about Archer's behavior and has his Makos man several critical positions on the ship.
Better get Mako!
Archer orders Hoshi to prepare an insectoid language distress call. With time running out, Trip and Phlox conclude that a mutiny is in order, and they free T'Pol and Reed to help.
There was a firefight!
The Enterprise crew regain control of the bridge.
And there was much rejoicing.
Meanwhile,
Tucker beams down and stuns Archer in the hatchery.
Boy, that was smart.
I know, I hate when that happens.
meanwhile,
Back on Enterprise, a thorough medical scan by Phlox reveals that the egg had sprayed Archer with a nurturing hormone,
Yuck.
making him focus on preserving the unborn insectoids. In the end, Archer is fully treated. Hayes confirms that he did not have a medical reason for thoughtlessly following questionable orders, and the ship resumes at full warp towards Azadi Prime. But that's next week's episode.
well, Lottie frickin' da!
So I wanted to ask you about something that stuck out to me was Hayes not questioning orders and not really thinking for himself. That's that very soldier-like mentality. I actually have a background in law enforcement and kind of saw a little bit of that, either from guys who came back from overseas and joined, or couldn't get on with the military, so law enforcement was the next best option. But there was that idea of just kind of blindly following orders, and I feel like comedians, when they get in initially, it seems to be a lot of learn as you go. And I feel like the vibe is kind of like, hey, the booker's telling you this, the promoter's telling you this, the host is telling you this, just do your material. We'll worry about, and we'll make sure you get a couple dollars. Did you experience any of that? Like coming up, like earlier in your career, that idea of just kind of not really knowing what to do, where to go, and just sort of blindly, like, what time is the show? I'll be there. Like, did you experience a lot of that?
Good question. I'll first say the military aspect of the episode that you just raised, I feel like is a great, like another good, so not even that much of a metaphor for, what goes on in life. But,
Right.
Have you ever read the book The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin?
No.
It's great. It essentially, she assesses that there are, four basic, not personality types, but tendencies. And there's a quadrant system sort of based on whether you are more motivated by internal or external sources. And so some people do both, some people do one, some people do the other, and some people do neither. And so she calls them upholders do both, questioners go internal, obligers do take from external sources, and rebels do neither. The joke she makes is that the rebels basically like, you can't make me and neither can I. And if you see things through this paradigm, you'd be like, oh wow, like I have some friends like, yeah, it makes sense that like they might be like, screw you, me, you can't tell me what to do to eat healthily or whatever it might be.
Right.
And you can take a test, it's pretty quick, and it's not to say it's a be all end all, but I have been assessed as a questioner, and that makes sense to me. And like, it doesn't mean that questioners, like, for example, like I don't drive extremely high above the speed limit. I used to, but I'm like, oh, when there's a good reason for a rule, then a questioner will be like, oh, that's a good reason to do the rule. Whereas an obliger will just be like, more likely to be like, I'm just going to follow the rule because it's the rule.
Right.
And that is the way it seems to me that like a military structure works. And as opposed to like, I don't know, I think it was it Martin Luther King who's like, if there's an unjust law, it's your duty to not follow it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And which sort of comes up in Buddhism as well. There's some religions that are more dogmatic, like just have faith, don't question. And I feel like there are probably people, like there's probably I'm sure there's versions of Christianity and Judaism, religions that I'm familiar with, that are not merely just do it, that are like about questioning, about really why is this the thing to do? Why is this the thing that's said?
Right.
Buddhism specifically, the Buddha like offered 84,000 teachings, and including very specifically saying like, don't do things just because I'm saying to do them. Like, don't do it on faith. Like, do it, try it if it makes sense to you, and if it works, if it serves you, if it seems like the thing, then do it. Like, but don't. Like, he's like, I think if you do these things, then they might have these positive effects for you and the people around you. But check for yourself. Like, that's the thing to do. And so like in this episode, it seemed like for sure the people in the crew, like the good guys who remained, pure of heart and vision,
Right.
are like, I think this is the right thing to do, even though our normally good boss is like, when they didn't know if he was, like, we got to check if he's incapacitated. Like, what is the protocol when you're like, who is allowed to question? Who is allowed, like, there has to be some measure of, like veto power or checks and balances in place so that there isn't just, a fascist regime that develops.
Yeah.
And so to answer, now that's all stuff that I was thinking about before you even asked. To answer your question, I started out doing comedy in Boston, and there was Boston's sort of like was at least an insular kind of scene at the time, where there was like an ecosystem in which comedians who had been there since the 80s, I was starting in like the early 2000s, like, they've been there for a couple decades, and there was like, I guess like not necessarily like different scenes, but like there was shows in New Hampshire, there was like circuits in Maine and Connecticut and Rhode Island. And like after you were doing comedy for a little while, you could, get the booker's information for these places and become an opener out there, kind of like on a mini version of becoming a road comic, not leaving like, traveling the whole country, but traveling the New England region. But the good news about this with respect to what you're asking is that there were all of these veteran comedians, like to use military terminology, these, which is weird though, because a veteran in the military is somebody who's out of it, not somebody who's still doing it. But so there was these comedians who had been at it for decades. And they were sometimes they were doing shows around town. You get to do shows with them, you get to see them work, you get to talk to them afterwards at the bar. And there were a lot of really friendly, people who loved comedy and wanted to offer, their wisdom and what could help. And I remember like very specifically, like a comedian or a couple comedians that were like, here's what you do, like with respect to this, like, there shouldn't be open mics on Saturdays, for example, or Friday nights, because those are nights for paid comedy shows, like professional comedians to earn money. And if somebody starts an open mic at a bar on a Saturday night, or like a good function room at a restaurant, an open mic isn't going to be as good a show as a show that costs the money. They might want to do it because it doesn't cost them money, but then the people won't come back because the open mic isn't as good as if you lay out some hundreds of dollars, get some good comedians there on a Saturday night. Then it's a room, like, it's a lack of forethought if you're like, oh, I just want to like get whatever I can right now, not thinking about even yourself in the future. If you're like a younger comedian, you're like, why don't I have a show Saturday night? Well, get better, and eventually you can. And so I feel like that was like one particular like guideline that was offered to me. Like, there was, so I feel like there was a lot of sort of informal like guidance and mentoring from the older comedians of Boston who had been there and seen it work, well, and seen it work poorly, and like know, the best circumstances for, setting up lights and sound or the setup of a room. And like just the idea of, when to do a show, when not to do a show, what money is good. Like, if somebody was like, at the time it was like, I don't know, when I was starting out as an opener, sometimes I get $50 for an opening set to do 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And I remember, here's the thing, which kind of, okay, I'll say the thing. Like, so this one particular, elder respected source comedian that I like looked up to, who I had internalized a thing that maybe he never even said specifically, but like, you should make at least $50 when you're opening. If they're only offering $25, like, that's like, they're ripping you off. That's not the person. Like, I wouldn't do that. I would say, and so I remember one time I got asked to open a show for $40, and I was like, I think I remember asking like, hey, could it be 50? And then we were like, never mind, we'll get somebody else. And so then I got nothing. But here's the thing. And there's like an old maybe Jackie Mason joke or something like that, where two older comedians are sitting around, maybe one of them Jackie Mason, and they're like, hey, where are you working Saturday night? He's like, I'm not working. Like they offered me $1,200, but I don't work for less than $1,600. And it's like, oh, so now you're doing nothing for nothing? Okay. I mean, but I also understand that because, like, let's say before I had a college booking agent, like once I got a college booking agent, they like have a specific, sort of schedule of how much money you make how much money they ask for. There's a range sometimes, and sometimes they're like, this school really, they used all their budget. Could you do it for, 20% less or 10% less than would ordinarily be? And that's fine if they're doing that. But sometimes, let's say the starting wage as a comedian with no credits to do an hour of comedy at a college, I feel like it seemed like it was like $1,000. That was like a good base price, like to get to. Sometimes you might have to fly somewhere or drive somewhere, whatever it is. It could be $1,000 plus hotel plus travel, whatever it is, a good amount of money. Then there's some colleges that might, be like, hey, can we get you here for $300? And for some people, they could, maybe. But then it's sort of like, there's no union of comedians only, but it would be good in a way if there was one. And there have been people who've formed coalitions over time, and I feel like informally so. But it makes sense that if there's a place that we can have a show, we can have a comedian here for $300, then if people find that out, then I guess all the shows are now $300 and not $1,000. So I've definitely turned down, shows over the years where people were like, it'll pay in exposure for sure, or it'll pay in this much money when it should be, 2, 3, 4 times as much. Yeah. And even though it's nice to get paid to do comedy and I love doing what I do, there are shows that I do for free. There's plenty. Brian Regan was on Mark Maron's podcast once and talked about how he told the story of doing his first college gig, and he got $1,000 to do comedy. And then he drove back into New York City where he was living, and he did a set late night at the Comic Strip or some comedy club and got paid $20 for his set. And he's like, what is my comedy worth? Is it worth $1,000 or $20? And yeah. I've had experiences like that where one night in Boston years ago, I was opening at a 1,000-seat theater for a famous comedian, and I did a short amount of time and got paid a good amount of money. And then I did a set where I was in the middle. I was featuring at a smaller club, so 1,000 seats, now maybe 100 seats, and I'm doing 20 minutes and getting paid slightly less. I'm doing twice the time for half the money. Yep. And then at late night, I just went and did a show at a fun improv theater where I was headlining, doing 30 or 40 minutes for free. And that was I was doing it because it was fun and useful and experimental. And I was working on new material. So there are always places. Anyway, so that's to zoom back in or out, I guess. There are, I think, I was raised in a comedy scene. I was incubated in a comedy scene that had, if not the right rules or objective rules, at least some guidelines, some measures to start with, until eventually then, like the Buddha said, be like, oh, figure out what works for you. If it makes sense to take a show for less money than you did on another time, you're allowed to do that. If you want to not do a show, if you want to not do a Zoom comedy event, if you do what you want to do, eventually, once you've had enough experience. But in the beginning, it is nice to have people who are doing what you love, who are doing things in ways that make sense, who seem like they're adults, they know what they're doing, they have things but here's the thing is, even that to an extreme, like the time when I was like, hey, can that $40 be $50? Today, if I were in that situation, or if I were giving myself advice back then, obviously knowing what I know now, it's fine that I didn't do it, but also it would have, I wouldn't have been letting down the fraternity, or the community if in that one, and that's the thing though, also, enough people do one thing and there could be a slippery slope. But in that particular instance, that $10 that I would or wouldn't have made, wouldn't be the be all end all, the breaking the bank of the situation. But so I do think that, but similarly, I was almost to military precision following what I perceived as the orders of my superior comedy officer, because well, I don't know what the right thing is, but this guy said this and that makes sense to me, so I'm going to go along with that. And we all, we all don't get to do all of the research in every aspect of our life. And so we do get to decide, well, has somebody else been through this, and can I apply their judgment because it makes sense to me in this situation? Sure. And like if the next week I'd been offered a similar deal, then maybe I would have gone the other way and been like, okay, yeah. Like every once in a while, I feel like, specifically asking for more money, if you think it's the fair thing, a lot of times it'll get you the more money that you think you deserve. And sometimes it'll get them to say, no, we can't do that. And then you get to decide, oh, well, then do I want to do it for the less money, or are they saying no forever and shutting down the door? But yeah, to answer your question, I guess the Boston comedy scene ran like a non-violent, mostly military.
Well, yeah, when it comes to the scene here in Greenville, as I mentioned, it's very small. If we have one mic on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, man, that's a great week. I mean, we've got our regular, I think Monday and Wednesday are pretty regular, and we've got a few others sporadically, but there's been times where and again, I have only been doing it for maybe a handful of years, but especially after that first wave of the pandemic, there was that group that flooded the open mics with just like, I've been sitting at home doing nothing but watching Netflix stand up with the thought of, I can do that. And a lot of them came with this notion of like, my special is, I'll be nailing down that special next week. This time next week, I'm a star. And I always took that as a chance to approach and just say, without trying to dash dreams so much, but a way to ask questions, and question their own brain's orders of like, so, hey, what's your writing process like? Well, I just get up there and wing it. Because you realize this is an exercise in repetitive refinement. Like this is what this is. You don't just go up there and just be funny. I mean, some people do with varying degrees of success, but like, what's your writing process like? What are you, performance wise, what are you doing in terms of, practicing? There's people who equate other types of performing to stand up. And while one might help the other, I don't think one equates to the other, because I've talked with folks who are just like, oh, I'm not getting booked on shows. I have all this stage experience. I have all this film experience. I have all this whatever experience. And the question I always ask is, okay, so what are your open mics like? Well, I don't do the open mics. Okay, well then prepare to not get booked.
That's funny. Here's 3 quick things. Number 1, I like that you don't go out trying to dash people's dreams. Dreams will dash on their own.
Oh, yeah.
And number 2, questions are great. Big fan of questions. Questions, yep, like those. And number 3, I feel like the thing you just described is like the reverse of Mitch Hedberg's hilarious joke about he's like, get into comedy, and then they start asking you like, oh, can you write, can you act, which is stuff that's like close to comedy but isn't exactly comedy.
Yeah.
And he likens it to like, it's like you work your whole life to get good at being a great chef, and they're like, oh man, you're a great chef, can you farm? And
yeah.
And so I feel like it's funny, like these people are like, look, I'm a great farmer, so give me a chef job.
Yeah. There's that thought of just, I remember talking with one person who they were like, next month I'm filming 3 specials back to back. I said, really? That's impressive. How long have you been doing stand-up? This is my 3rd week.
I would like to see.
Yeah,
I think a little bit of one of those specials.
Yeah, and the person offered me a seat in the front row, and I was just like, I think I'm busy then. I don't know that I can. Oh, God.
I didn't even tell you when it is though. Yeah, I'm busy for many nights.
Yeah,
I'm busy at nights. Yeah, nights are busy for me. Hard to make it work.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm doing it during the day too. Yeah, days are even worse.
Oh, yeah, days are even worse. Oh gosh.
It's like night but with light. Yeah. Oh boy.
Oh yeah. Well, do you Do you have anybody in your life that has been one of these military type guys, or someone who has that mentality close to you that you were able to observe? My father served in Vietnam, and then became a Baptist minister, so childhood was real fun. But yeah, did you have anybody? I mean, aside from your the mentors in the Boston comedy scene, which I imagine those guys can come off very aggressive.
Could, yeah. So you mean the literal military? I mean, my dad was in the National Guard during the Vietnam War, which was in part because he didn't want to, have to kill people optimally.
Yeah.
But yes, and that isn't. So I feel like my dad is not particularly militaristic, and so yeah, I guess the answer is mainly no. I can't really think of many people in my life, certainly not during my formative years. Like, I'm an only child. My parents were both music teachers for most of my childhood, my life. My grandmother was a nurse. My other grandmother was a teacher. My grandfather, one I didn't know, and one was a music teacher as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I just had a lot of teachers around me, I guess.
No, that's great though. And I mean, not to, pump you up some more, but like your style is, I've already said it, very clean, super sharp, and so tight. But as I was listening at one point, I was watching it on my TV, but I found myself sort of turning and looking away from the screen just to hear the cadence of the, and it was almost musical. And I was like, and then, I did, take a peek at your Wikipedia page to see that you do have music in your background and that you've done quite a bit of music. And I was like, oh man, all of this stuff is clicking together to create the Myq Kaplan.
I appreciate that. I do. I think that, every comedian has some level of, has a cadence, has a way of speaking, a way of delivering that, like, ideally is like, theirs and theirs alone. Listen to Maria Bamford or Nate Bargatze, or
Brian Regan, Mitch Hedberg, you've mentioned already. Yeah.
And yeah, so I do think that there's sort of another like kind of spectrum of like, in comedy, there's what you're saying and then there's how you're saying it, and I mean, like Chris Rock, I feel like famously will, when he's trying out new material, will try it out with as little performance, as little emphasis on the delivery as possible, just to get as objective a read on the content before he, polishes off its final form.
Right.
And so I feel like when I started doing comedy, I was much more focused on, I wasn't aware of this, but I would assess now that I was more about the form than the function. That is to say, I was learning how to tell jokes. I was learning how to say things without even really the thing that I was saying being important necessarily. Like, some of the things I said were important to me or personal, but some of them were just absurd. Some of them were, pop culture related. Some of them were, some of them were about like my divorce. Some of them were about my veganism. Some of them were about social issues that I care about. And some of them were about how words sound like other words,
Yeah.
And they were all coming from me. And like now my goal, like in fact, the most recent album that I put out, AKA, I feel like is the way that I would say this, and will say it, is that like in the beginning, my first albums were full of jokes that I care about a lot, and whatever they were about, I really cared about and for the jokes and constructing them and presenting them. And now my goal is, and I feel like this album is the best I've come close to having a bunch of jokes that I care about things that I care about the most. Yeah. So like the content like matches the form in this case. And so I think that some comedians start the other way. Some comedians start without knowing how to tell a joke at all, but they really know what they want to say. They really have a story to tell. They have a perspective, whether it's political, whether it's a personal, traumatic thing that they're trying to work through. And then eventually, like ideally, they learn how to do it. They learn the how and then apply the how to the what. Whereas I feel like I started with the how. Yeah. Whatever it is, I might have said it wrong, but I started like not having a what, only having a how, and then eventually applying the how to the what. Whereas other people start with a what and then learn how and do the other thing, whatever the opposite of what I just said was.
I think I started with because I think I held off doing stand-up for so long, even though I respected stand-up so much. I think I ended up being, I guess I'll call myself a student of comedy.
Sure.
But in just looking at like, okay, how they're standing, okay, the microphone's in this hand at this time, but then they switch or they put it back in the stand to do an act out, or they need both hands to do something else. And then not only, the movement on stage, but things that they're doing with their voice. We mentioned the cadence, one of the things, I mentioned I listened to stand up on my way to work to sort of engage my brain, but part of a game that I do with myself is I specifically won't look at, because the name comes up of who it is. I try to just hear the first few words and see, it's kind of a, name that tune. Yeah. Name that comic. And I try to, and I think my average is pretty good actually, but yeah, looking at all that stuff is so fascinating because, in terms of what is happening in this episode of Enterprise, I'm bringing it back.
Please.
And is, folks are trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. And, when they, because every sailor, but every, starship, Starfleet personnel, mutiny is a dirty word. Like, oh, we don't mutiny because the captain, does the thing and they're right. And it's, you follow the captain, and they're, they've got your best interest in mind. And when someone goes off the rails and starts actively working against the crew, that's when it's kind of left to the crew to say, okay, are we going to follow blindly like the Makos did? Or are we going to say, all right, hey, look, yeah, we've got these soldiers and the captain's gone off the rails, but we're scientists. We're going to figure this out. We're going to mutiny and we're going to fix it. Have you ever seen in comedy someone who has, and I mean, I understand you're going to have to be, if the answer is yes, the names will obviously be changed or omitted to protect. But have you ever seen somebody go kind of off the rails and have everybody who was kind of on their side kind of go, no, I'm busy that night,
Well, I guess the first person who comes to mind is Michael Richards. And
okay. Yeah. Very public. Yeah.
But I mean, on a personal level, nothing springs to mind immediately. I mean, there are some comedians who have like taken turns towards like the alt-right, and I love, so this is not a comedian who's done that. I love Sam Morril. I think he's super funny.
Yeah.
Great comedian, great guy. And he has a joke in one of his newer specials where he talks about the people, he's like, I forget the wording, but the content is like, the people who seem like the most concerned about free speech are comedians and racists. And he's like, it's like an unfortunate, pairing. But also for some comedians, it seems like not as unfortunate to them, like it's working for them.
Right.
But also I feel like there is no objective, everyone agrees that this is the way to do things, like almost anywhere. Like, what is the thing that I was just thinking about? Oh yeah, another Buddhist reference. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk who died recently and has written so many books that I've read and still so many that I haven't. He talks sometimes about the concept of interbeing, to say that like we all, everything that exists, we all inter-are. And by that he means, for example, if I understand correctly, a flower like can't exist without water, without sunlight, without dirt. Like there's no way that a flower exists independent of other things that are quote unquote not that flower. Sometimes a bee can't survive without a flower, and a flower can't survive without a bee. They inter-are. Everything is interdependent. And like you and I, we can't exist without our parents having existed. We can't exist without food, without water, without, there's nothing in the universe that exists independent on its own without any input or interaction with anything else. Like there's a concept called Indra's net, which I believe is like in a drop of dew, like, you can perhaps see a reflection of everything else in the universe. Like if you know everything about one thing, then you could extrapolate everything else. That in order for us to be like this here, everything had to be exactly the way it was in all the billions of years leading up to now. If something was different, right after the Big Bang, then everything would be different right now. And so I would say that back to comedy, like there are some, there's a lot of different communities within comedy, like subgroups of people who, there's nobody who thinks exactly like I do. There's nobody who feels exactly like I do. But, you find people that are like, oh, you seem to be, on some of the same pages, or at least in the same book as what I'm working on. So like I resonate with you and you resonate with me. Great. And then, so there are probably examples. I could be the answer to this question that you're asking for somebody else,
Oh, okay. Yeah, and looking at those types of things, you kind of see, because stand up, at the end of the day, still an art form. So while they're, going off the rails, could be a Michael Richards situation, could also be an Andy Kaufman, and they could be, another word for going off the rails could be trendsetter.
Yeah.
And it's hard in that, with that to say, well, you're doing it wrong. Really? This is my art. This is what I'm doing. Yeah.
Hey man, look, this is my art. I'm recording 3 specials next week.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And to be fair, like do you know Keith and the Girl, the podcast?
I've heard of it.
It's one of the longest running podcasts that I know of, and they're buddies of mine. And Keith Malley is a guy who used to do stand-up comedy regularly, but now has this daily radio show, and that is his like main creative enterprise. And also up until the pandemic, at least, every year on his birthday, which is April 15th, he would perform an hour of stand-up, having most of the time not performed any stand-up throughout the year, though like writing it in like the month or so or months leading up to it, maybe not. I feel like when he's doing the radio show, he's not like he's not explicitly working out material, but he might be like, oh, what am I thinking about? What am I talking about? And maybe that'll be part of the thing. And he's as a friend of his who's a comedian, there's some other comedians that are also friends of his that are like, that's not how you do comedy. Like, you don't only do comedy once a year and record it as a DVD. That's not only recording specials. Like, that's not doing comedy. And also, he is making specials that are better than a lot of other specials. He is a funny person. And, if you like him and if you're his fan, then you don't need him to do comedy every night or more times. Like, he gets to do things his way, and other people get to be like, if somebody says, well, he's not a real comedian, well, then that doesn't matter. He's not a comedian then. He's Keith Malley,
Yeah.
He's not Lenny Bruce, and none of us are,
Exactly.
And so I feel like the person, like, I'm listening to Alan Watts a lot recently, and he talks about Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. And the thing about Taoism is that I think my understanding of the Tao is that is the way, and there's no way to be out of it. Like, there's no way to move in time a different direction. There's no way for whatever we do, even if it feels like we're going against the grain, we're part of the universe manifesting the way that it does. And like, whatever you feel about free will or determinism. Like, you didn't, in this lifetime, you didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose like how you were treated before your memories formed. You didn't choose how much you were fed, or there were so many things that were out of your control that shaped who you are, to the point that if you're like, well, now I'm in control. Well, how are you in control now if everything that led to the control that you believe you have was not within your control? And that's fine. You can think that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the idea that like, whatever you call, you don't have to, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it Voltron, you can call it Lenny Bruce, you can call it Keith Malley. Like, you get to, like you said, you get to do your art the way that you want to do it. Like that young the young special maker gets to make their art the way they want to do it. Maybe in 10 years they'll release a special that cuts together like pieces of these 3 specials, and they're like, can you believe when I thought that this was the thing to do?
Yeah.
Like, can you believe it? Wow, I can. Isn't it great? Maybe they are going to be great. Who can say? I really am curious. But yeah, and so in everything that I just said, in the context of, of the Tao, the way, like there's truly in at least in one way, not talking ethically, but just like there's no way to like grow your hair wrong. There's no way to breathe incorrectly. If you're breathing and living, you're doing it. There's no way for a river to go down a mountain incorrectly. It's just that's the way that it goes. And so, but in that, the only thing that I would say is like the wrongest would be telling someone that you're doing it wrong. Like tell somebody like yelling at a river, like, hey, that's not the way to go down a hill. Back in my day, we had rivers went uphill both ways, up and up and up and up to up and away. That was the Superman river of my childhood. And also, so the river is one with the Tao, and also the person yelling at it is like, that's this sort of like how in comedy, freedom of speech is such that, like, Carlin and Lenny Bruce specifically went to jail for what they said. That was government censorship. That's against the law. That is anti-freedom of speech. When people are just upset at things that you say and they say things about how they're upset, that's also freedom of speech. Like you saying what you want to say and them saying what they want to say. If they say it like out loud during your set, surely then the private owner of the comedy venue can ask that person to leave, but none of that is government getting involved. None of that is censorship. None of that is a free speech issue. Unless the person is yelling fire, and then that is probably governmentally against the law as well. But there's kind of no way to, for art-wise, very little way to do it wrong.
Yeah, and in talking about that we are all connected, I think this is really a really good example of the crew sort of coming together without the captain. Of like, okay, this element is out of commission, so we're going to have to band together. And I feel like I one of the things I've been saying this a lot to people who are pursuing artistic endeavors, who have reached out to me either through the show or through comedy or whatever. And I offer encouragement or advice where I can, with my limited experience. But when they say, hey man, thank you so much, it really means a lot to me, I say, hey, look, nobody gets there alone. We're all influenced by someone, or someone else is going with us, or we are going to someone, or something along those lines. And I think that's maybe sort of the outer edges of what you're talking about. But it's fascinating to me what these things, because I don't have a lot of experience with Buddhism, Taoism, or anything like that. My wife actually did study some of that in college. She had nothing but good things to say about it. So this is prompting me to probably look into some of that stuff and see that. And I've said this before about Star Trek in terms of how it relates to the real world. The idea of like, hey, look, if we as the human race stand a chance, or the smallest sliver of hope of reaching the stars, we actually have to reach sideways first.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful, and makes me think of these two things. Number one, space related, if not Star Trek specifically. There's a Carl Sagan quote I love. It's something like, in order to create an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe.
Oh, wow. That's a great quote. I love that.
It's a real good one. And the other thing that I was thinking that you just reminded me of is also from Buddhism. So my friend Gus, who is a Buddhist and is my entry point, into learning these things, shared with me that one aspect of Buddhism is that things have been happening infinitely since beginningless time, they say. That like what's happening now was caused by what was happening a moment ago, caused by a moment before that, a moment, and you can keep going back moment, and there's nothing that doesn't have a cause. Like in different religions, they might be like, well, there's got to be, it had to start. And in Buddhism, they're like, nope. Like the Dalai Lama was like, said a thing about the Big Bang. He's like, Big Bang, no problem, just not first Big Bang. He's like, before something caused the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, another universe, another something.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
And so the thing, I believe it is impermanent phenomena, which is most of, what we are, what we see, anything that we perceive with our senses for the most part. Impermanent phenomena are things that are also called products of causes and conditions. That there are conditions such that this is why what is happening now has been caused. And almost always it's that something from the moment before causes the thing in the moment now. But the reason that this occurs to me now is my friend Gus told me recently, he said a thing in an email that made me ask this question. He said something about something that there were some causes that were simultaneous with their effects. And I was like, how could that be? What is an example of that? And now I will offer you the example that he gave, which I think is also beautiful or beautiful.
Nice.
And goes along with the thing that you said about reaching out sideways. He said, like, imagine two playing cards, for example, neither of which could stand, straight up on their own on a table. But if you put them both together in, like an A-frame, then they can stand. And so the cause of one card being at that angle is the other card being at that angle, and the cause of that card being at that angle is the other card being. So they are now, once they're there, simultaneously causing the position of the other one, so that it's not just from the past. Obviously, the past got them into that position, but once they're there, it's a simultaneous cause of mutual support.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I can't wait to edit this episode so I can listen to this discussion again.
Very nice. Here's a brief. What if you were like, man, I can't wait to edit this episode so I can take out all the stuff I don't understand.
There's I don't know if you've noticed, I have been taking notes.
Oh yeah.
While you've been talking, it's like, I need to get that book. I need to get that book.
I appreciate it.
So let's because I know you're pressed for time, so am I. I could talk to you all night, but let's move along to our segment that we've lovingly titled "Who Do We Blame?" This story was written by Andre Bormanis, whose last work on the series was season 3, episode 3, Extinction, which was directed by LeVar Burton. We spoke about that on episode 48 with poet comedian Moody Black.
Ooh, I love all those words.
Oh yeah. And it was also done by Mike Sussman, whose last work on the series was season 3, episode 14, Stratagem, which we discussed on episode 60 with TTRPG writer designer Josiah Martindale, with Bormanis doing the teleplay as well. This episode was directed by Michael Grossman. This is his first work in the franchise, and he's got some interesting credits here. I'll hit a few of them. Tales from the Hollywood Hills, Pat Hobby teamed with Genius. That was his first gig in 1987 as a production assistant.
Congrats.
Yeah. Everybody's got to start somewhere. But that was actually not too bad. It starred Christopher Lloyd and Colin Firth. That's
a post Back to the Future Christopher Lloyd. Must have been pretty hot.
Oh yeah.
Unless they filmed it before.
Yeah. Shortly after that was Frankenstein General Hospital, which I got to find a copy of. That just sounds like too much fun. From 1988, he was a assistant director on that. And
that's what AD means. I thought you're like, that was from 1988 AD.
Oh, yeah.
In the year of our Lord.
The year of our Lord. He would continue on to second units and other AD spots into the 90s. But his first directing gig was 2 episodes of Earth 2 from 1995. Then he did the Keenan and Kel movie, Two Heads Are Better Than None. That was in 2000. Then he went on to 11 episodes of The Invisible Man in the early 2000s. Season 1, episode 7 of Firefly.
Very nice.
Are you a Firefly fan?
I am a Firefly fan.
It's such a good series. I really do enjoy it. We actually covered the pilot episode. We do what I call Star Trek adjacent, and we talk about other usually pilot episodes of other sci-fi franchises. He also did season 7, episode 11 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Is
that the musical episode? No. Okay, no, that was called Once More with Feeling. But
right, yeah,
oh, yeah, and that was also in season 6. I'm so sorry. Anyway,
Mike showing his colors. He is a big Buffy fan.
Buffy was my favorite show for quite a long time. Angel as well.
A friend of mine actually had a Buffy sort of like this show, but it was covering Buffy. He and his wife were doing it. It was called Meet Me at the Bronze. And it was a fun show. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. Their schedules just didn't allow for them to record and edit and all the things that go with a podcast. But yeah. So anyway, Michael Grossman also did 4 episodes of Angel. And this is his only franchise appearance to date. He also, after this, he went on to turn in some work on Charmed and Eureka, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, and Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai, fantastic. Yeah.
Isn't it great?
It's so fun.
It's better than it has any reason to be. Like that, it should not be that good. His most recent credit is Roswell, New Mexico, season 4, episode 6, Kiss from a Rose, premiering July 11th, 2022. Guest stars, we've seen these familiar faces before: Stephen Culp and Daniel Day Kim as Major Hayes and Corporal Chang, respectively. But the really interesting part here is the production designer and the makeup effects supervisor. Herman Zimmerman, he designed the Xindi insectoid vessel, which we don't really get a lot of other sets other than the Enterprise interior sets. So Zimmerman began working for NBC in 1965 as an assistant art director on Days of Our Lives. In the 70s, he served as an art director on shows like Sigmund and the Sea Monster, Land of the Lost, Far Out Space Nuts, and Lost Saucer. And then Zimmerman began working in the Star Trek franchise when he was hired to work on Next Gen. He also worked on 6 of the Star Trek movies: Final Frontier, Undiscovered Country, Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. And he was also the art director for Deep Space Nine, for which he received 4 Emmy nominations and the Art Directors Guild Awards 1996 Excellence in Production Design Award. And Zimmerman's final work for the franchise was the set of the Enterprise.
Wow, I think you deserve an award for saying all that.
Thank you.
You get a Zimmy.
Thank you. I do try to deep dive as much as I can here. So the special effects, part of everything that was going on, again, as I said earlier, nobody gets there alone. It wasn't just Herman Zimmerman and the director Michael Grossman and the fantastic cast. We also had Michael Westmore, who was the head of the makeup effects team. Now, Michael Westmore actually comes from a legendary Hollywood family, the Westmore family, very prominent in the Hollywood makeup scene. In fact, they have their own Wikipedia page, and it is a fascinating read if you're into sort of the behind the scenes of, old Hollywood and Hollywood makeup and creature features and stuff like that. Michael began working for Universal Studios in 1961 as a makeup artist and was promoted after 3 years to assistant department head of makeup. Some of his earliest roles at Universal included The Munsters and Land of the Lost, probably with Herman Zimmerman. Michael worked freelance during the 70s and 80s on a few little films like Rocky and Raging Bull.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Yeah. It rings a bell to start the round. And
ding, ding. Yeah.
He worked on makeup effects he worked on makeup sets for the CIA, for operatives overseas to change their identities.
That's a real life thing.
That is a real life thing. I was like, oh man. And I'm going to continue to look into that because that is just super fascinating. Myq was hired in 1986 to work on Next Gen, where one of his first assignments was the development of the makeup used on Brent Spiner to create the character of Mr. Data. He developed the makeup effects for the Ferengi and the Cardassians and the Jem'Hadar.
There's a race called the Cardassians.
Cardassians versus Kardashians.
Okay, that's totally different. My mistake. I can't understand why I thought one sounded like the other. Go on. Okay.
They are very, very similar. In fact, there are
I'm trying to keep up. Yeah.
There's quite a few memes out there that have the Kardashians wearing Cardassian makeup, and
very glad to hear it.
They're just delightful. He would go on to work on Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and of course Enterprise. Westmore was put forward for a special Oscar in 1980 for his work on Raging Bull, and after it was turned down, there was such a reaction that a proper award was instituted during the following year. So his work kind of started the makeup effects Oscar.
Wow.
Westmore won an Oscar for makeup in 1985 for the film Mask, starring Cher, and has been nominated 3 other times. What are those 3 other times? I'm glad you asked. 2010, The Year We Make Contact from 1984. The Clan of the Cave Bear from 1986, which I've never heard of that until I looked this up, but probably
he really made them look like bears.
There's a lot of effects in that film for sure, but definitely one of my favorite movie posters. Like it's got a very young Daryl Hannah, but with like stark white hair and this fascinating design painted on her face. And it's weird that a poster grabbed me that much, but it's such a unique look. The third thing that he was nominated for an Oscar for was Star Trek First Contact in 1996. And he actually won 9 Emmy Awards and was nominated. This was the part that was that made my jaw drop. He was nominated for at least 1 Emmy every year from 1976 to 78 and from 1984 to 2005. So that's,
my goodness, he's really been falling off.
Yeah. Oh, but anyways, we love to deep dive on the character actors and some of the behind the scenes stuff. I hope everybody enjoyed those little tidbits, those little nuggets. But let's get to our final thoughts and the big question. Myq Kaplan, is this episode of Enterprise the first episode you've ever watched? Is it essential viewing?
I mean, for me, it is. I think and it's another example that's sort of like the spectrum of relativity. Like for the non-Star Trek fan, it is not essential. But for the Star Trek fan, I leave it to you. I say it could go either way. I enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, I've talked a few times about the journey of Scott Bakula's character, Jonathan Archer, and especially starting with that season 2 finale, where we see the shift from explorer to man seeking vengeance. We've seen him take actions that are progressively less and less captain-y, and making some of these questionable decisions about questionable moral decisions. And this time, actually through no fault of his own, it kind of comes to a head, because we've seen, even before this episode, there were instances where the ship was attacked by pirates, and they learned that, they're stuck in this section of space, so they're just trying to survive. But because Archer is so dedicated to his mission, they ended up capturing one of the pirates, and because they wouldn't give him the information he wanted, he tossed him in an airlock and hit depressurize. And one of his people was like, Captain, and he goes, he's going to die. And he goes, not for another 20 seconds. And it was like, we're seeing a different side of Archer here. So yeah, I think if you're really fascinated by the journey of the captain, of Archer specifically. I think this is an interesting look because it kind of shows like, hey, you're our captain, you're our leader, we've got your back to a point. But like, if things get too hairy, we will take this ship back. And I mean, and it's impressive because the crew that took back the Enterprise aren't soldiers. They're scientists, they're explorers. They took it over from the soldiers. So that was interesting to see, maybe a little subtle commentary of like that. Maybe the soldier mentality isn't so great. Maybe we should be looking at facts and science. Draw whatever conclusions you'd like from that, audience.
I like it, and I'll offer one more Buddhist analogy. There's a thing the Buddha said, I believe, that the bucket is not filled by the last drop. The bucket is not filled by the first drop. The bucket is filled by each drop. And so in order to have a full bucket of Star Trek watching experience, then you do need to watch each episode. But, if eventually you're like, oh, you could have a smaller bucket, let us know what the essential Star Trek water bucket is. But for now, this is one of all. So
awesome. Well, next week we will be joined by Lego mini Starfleet ship artist Chris Ames to discuss Enterprise Season 3, Episode 18, Azadi Prime, which of course is available exclusively on Paramount Plus. Myq, where can people see you do stand-up, old stuff, new stuff, live stuff, and stuff on the internet?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So my name is Myq Kaplan, spelled MyQ Kaplan. If you go to myqkaplan.com, that's a nice central hub where you can find a lot of things like my albums, or if you just, search in most album purveying platforms. My most recent one is called AKA, and there's a number going back to my first one, Vegan Mind Meld, which has a Star Trek reference right in the title. And my special Small Dork and Handsome is on Amazon these days. I also put out a newsletter full of fun units every week, and more if you subscribe for more, but you can get at least one free set of a few jokes and fun stuff every week at myqkaplan.substack.com. My podcasts are called Broccoli and Ice Cream and The Faucet, and my live shows tour dates are on my website, and if you follow me on social media, you can find out about those as well, and I'm just at MyQ Kaplan on all those various social media sources, and I think that's about enough.
And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials. From all of us at the Computer Resume podcast, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in 10 forward.
Us on Patreon and rate, review, and share on all your favorite platforms. Feel free to send us your subspace transmissions to computerresumepodcast@gmail.com or at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The Computer Resume podcast was created and produced by Mr. Todd A. Davis. Our logo was designed by Will Martin and Justin Bishop. The opening theme was produced by Justin Bishop, and our outro music was provided with permission by Dronode. Additional music was provided by Mr. Todd A. Davis and Gary Horn, and the voice of Computer Resume podcast and executive producer, me, Kat Davis. # LLAP. We'll see you next time.
Going through a Star Trek. We're doing Star Trek stuff in space. We probably got some phasers and shuttle pods, and we're gonna find a brand new race.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?